7 years. Not a single word, not to her parents, not to her doctors, not even to herself. Until the day she met a homeless boy, behind the trash bins. Camera, close up on Lila's small hand clutching a glass bottle. Jayden's voice drifts in, warm, honest. You know, even trash sings, if you listen close enough. They say the silence inside a home is often a sign of peace, but in the Whitmore mansion, that silence was so cold you could almost hear the sound of a heart breaking. For 7 years, little Lila Whitmore, only daughter of tech billionaire Richard Whitmore, had not spoken a single word, not to her parents, not to her doctors, not to anyone. Her bedroom was on the top floor, where sunlight streamed through pure white curtains and cast soft light on the walls covered with her paintings. In every picture there were always 2 small figures standing by the sea, a blonde child and a shadow whose face was never clear. Richard once told the doctor that his daughter wasn't mute. The doctor nodded. Her voice, her nerves, her brain, all perfectly normal. Then why won't she speak? Richard asked, his voice tightening between frustration and helplessness. Dr. Linda Reyes looked down at the file, then said slowly, "Because perhaps the little girl has chosen silence." Those words froze the room. Chosen to be silent. 3 simple words, yet they struck like a sentence on the parents who had spent millions trying to heal their only child. That night, Emily, Lila's mother, sat beside her and read a fairy tale, just like every evening. Her voice was gentle and warm, but her eyes were tired, hollowed by nights that had long lost their faith. Lila said nothing. She only answered through sign language, every slight movement of her hands a silent reply, precise enough to break your heart. "You understand everything, but you don't want to talk to anyone, do you?" Emily whispered, though she knew no answer would come. Lila didn't respond. She only looked at her mother, eyes deep and endless, as if holding 1,000 words never spoken. When the girl drifted to sleep, Emily quietly set the storybook down on the table, turned to her husband, and whispered, "Do you think maybe she's punishing us?" "Punishing us?" Richard frowned. "We've given her everything. Schools, specialists, doctors, therapists. But maybe we've never given her the one thing she truly needed." The next morning, the mansion returned to its perfect, monotonous rhythm. Lila woke up at exactly 7, put on the dress pre-chosen by her personal stylist, ate the organic breakfast prepared by the private chef, and began her home lessons with her tutor. Everything was on schedule, precise, spotless, leaving no room for a single free breath. From behind the glass door of his office, Richard watched his daughter write each line of her homework, flawless, without a single mistake. But he realized the thing that terrified him most wasn't her silence. It was that empty gaze, the gaze of a child living as though she didn't exist. She's like a ghost inside her own life. Richard sighed, his voice rough. At that moment, he didn't yet know that just a few hours later, beyond the rose garden and the perfect white fences, a strange boy would walk into their lives, a boy who owned nothing except a smile and a genuine heart. And that meeting would shatter every silence in that house. Tuesday morning. Everything inside the Whitmore mansion unfolded as usual, perfect, orderly, and emotionless. But that day, there was something different. A sound coming from the back garden. Richard, in his office, frowned slightly. Their private waste service always arrived at 4 a.m., never late, never missed a pickup. So who could be out there, in the garden of a billionaire? He opened the security monitor. On the screen appeared a boy, about 17, thin, dark-skinned, wearing a worn-out hoodie. He carefully sorted bottles and cans, placing each neatly to one side. Not rushing, not dirty, not stealing. Just focused, as if performing something sacred. Richard hesitated, his hand hovering over the security button. Then something made him stop. The boy was smiling, a real smile, kind, pure, and utterly sincere. He had just picked up a clear glass bottle, held it to the sunlight, and blew softly across its mouth. A sound emerged, low, resonant, gentle, like a sorrowful song. "Every bottle has its own voice," he murmured, voice quiet but clear. "Some just need someone to listen." Richard froze. The words echoed in his mind. Some just need someone to listen. Something about it felt true. And then Lila appeared. She stepped out from the back porch, her bare feet touching the cold tiles. No one knew why she went there. Maybe curiosity, maybe an invisible calling. Jayden, the boy collecting recyclables, looked up. Their eyes met. One pair brown and deep as the earth. The other is blue and cold like the sea wind. Neither spoke for several seconds. The world itself seemed to hold its breath. Then Jayden smiled, so genuine it was impossible not to trust him. "Hey there, little one," he said softly. "Didn't mean to scare you. Just recycling. Saving the planet, you know." Lila didn't answer. She only tilted her head, her gaze curious. Jayden picked up a green bottle, lifted it to his lips and blew another note, higher, clearer. The sound drifted through the air like the song of the ocean. "Wanna try?" He offered the bottle to her. Lila looked at it, then glanced back toward the house. She hesitated. She had never touched anything dirty before. But somehow his eyes told her it was safe. She took the bottle, lifted it to her lips, blew. No sound came out. Jayden smiled gently, not mocking, not disappointed, just joyful, as if witnessing a minor miracle. That's okay. The first note always takes time. Lila puffed her cheeks and blew again, still no sound. Jayden laughed, clapping softly. "There you go. You've got the spirit." From the second-floor window, Richard and Emily watched in astonishment. They had once hired comedians, musicians, even magicians to make their daughter smile. None had succeeded. Yet this boy, with nothing but a smile and an empty bottle, had made Lila glow like morning sunlight. The two sat there for 20 minutes, a silent girl and a talkative boy, and not one moment felt awkward. Jayden spoke of little things, about his sister Aaliyah, who lived with their aunt, about collecting cans to buy her notebooks. No complaints, no bitterness, just small, ordinary stories, strangely warm and human. When he was about to leave, Jayden slung the bag of bottles over his shoulder and said quietly, "Same time Thursday. It's the best recycling day in this neighborhood." Lila nodded, her blonde hair swaying lightly. She had never nodded that fast before, and as he turned to go, she lifted her hand. For the first time in 7 years, Lila waved to someone. At that very moment, Mrs. Caldwell, Lila's tutor, shouted sharply from behind, "Lila, what are you doing? You there, you're trespassing on private property. I'll call the police." Jayden flinched. Before he could speak, Richard stepped outside, his tone firm but not cold. That won't be necessary. The boy is allowed to be here. Caldwell froze in disbelief. Jayden bowed his head. Sorry, sir. I didn't mean any trouble. I'll leave. Lila grabbed her father's hand, pointing at Jayden, her eyes pleading, trembling. Richard looked at his daughter, then turned to Jayden and said slowly, Thursday. You can come back. Same time. Jayden smiled, a smile bright enough to warm the whole cold morning. Thursday it is, little one. See you then. He walked away, his figure fading behind the white fence. Lila ran inside, opened her iPad, and typed one word. Friend. The boy had nothing in his hands, but he had one thing the entire world around Lila had forgotten. A heart that knew how to listen. Thursday, 7 a.m. Lila was already sitting on the steps, her white dress sprinkled with dewdrops. In her hands were rows of glass bottles, washed clean and neatly lined up. To her, they weren't trash. They were instruments of magic, the first things in her life that made her want to wake up early. From afar came footsteps, uneven, quick at first, then slowing as they drew near. Jayden appeared. He wore the same worn-out hoodie as before, but his face was bright, like he was carrying sunlight in his pocket. You saved these for me? Jayden asked, looking at the bottles, his tone a mix of surprise and warmth. Lila nodded. She didn't speak, but there was something in her eyes, brighter than words. Jayden sat down on the step, pulling 2 sandwiches wrapped in newspaper from his backpack. He handed one to her. Half for me, half for my recycling partner. Lila hesitated, staring at the simple peanut butter sandwich, unlike the lavish breakfasts she used to have. But then she gently took it, pinched a small piece, and chewed slowly. Jayden smiled. See? You're officially part of the team now. They began to work. Jayden talked non-stop about everything under the sun, about the stars, about his sister, Aaliyah, who loved painting skies, about how every glass bottle made its own sound. Lila didn't say a word, but every glance, every nod was an answer. They spoke in light, in gestures, in presence. You know what I love about bottles? Jayden held up a green one, letting the sunlight shine through it. They sing. Listen. He blew softly. A deep note echoed, like the breath of the sea. He picked up a clear bottle and blew again, a higher, longer tone like the whisper of the wind. This one's a baritone. The clear one's a soprano. Every bottle's got its own voice, just like people. Lila watched closely, her eyes wide. It was the first time she had seen beauty in something thrown away. From the kitchen window, Emily and her mother were watching. She froze when she saw her daughter. The girl who once avoided all contact, who used to tremble around strangers, now sitting beside one, smiling. She set her teacup down quickly and wiped her tears. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He's doing in days what therapists couldn't do in years." That afternoon, Emily brought out a tray of sandwiches and orange juice. Jayden looked awkward, about to refuse. "Thank you, ma'am, but I'm okay." Emily smiled, her voice trembling slightly. "Please, join us." The 3 of them sat together, a poor boy, a refined woman, and a girl once imprisoned in silence. No one said much, but something was being reborn in the air. Emily spoke softly. "She seems to like you." Jayden smiled simply. "She listens better than anyone I know." she doesn't talk," Emily said, her voice breaking. "So what?" Jayden replied. "My grandma used to say, the wisest people speak the least. When she finally talks, it'll change the world." Lila looked up. Sunlight touched her eyes, making them shimmer like water. She leaned gently against Jayden's shoulder. She didn't say a word, but that one gesture was enough to make Emily cry. That night, Richard reviewed the security footage. He saw his daughter, smiling, eating a sandwich, looking up at the boy with eyes bright with hope. He fell silent, then said quietly to his wife, "We should hire him, not as charity, as her companion." Emily smiled through her tears. He wouldn't take charity, but if it's a real job, maybe he'd accept. Richard nodded. Then it settled. Jayden Carter, the first person who ever made our daughter feel alive. Sometimes, miracles don't come from the things we can buy. They come from someone who sees value in what the world has thrown away. Inside her bedroom, Lila sat by the window, halfway through a painting. Two small figures on the front steps, and a small caption beneath them. Thursday equals happy. But tonight there was no Jayden, no knock at the back door, no soft clinking of bottles. Only thunder rolling over the coast, and heavy rain hitting the glass. The clock read 2 a.m. Then, a siren tore through the night. Blue and red lights flashed outside the window, dancing across the ceiling like a nightmare. Lila flinched. She heard shouting voices in the yard below. Richard opened her door, his voice hoarse. "Stay here, sweetheart." But Lila ran to the window, and in that instant, she saw Jayden. Police officers were pinning him down, his hands cuffed behind him, blood trickling from his lip. Beside him, a young girl screamed. Aaliyah, Jayden's little sister. An officer barked, "You're 18 now, kid. You're going to jail." Jayden didn't fight back. He just turned his head, looking up toward the distant mansion. As if he knew she was watching, he smiled, faint but still warm. He moved his lips silently. "It's okay, little one," Lila screamed. But no sound came out. Her throat trembled violently, her mouth opened, yet no voice escaped. She pounded on the glass, tears flooding her eyes. The scene below blurred behind the rain and her crying. Jayden was pushed into the police car, the door slammed. The car pulled away, its flashing lights fading into the darkness. And then, from deep within her chest, a broken, jagged sound tore through 7 years of silence. A sound, not yet a word, but an absolute scream. Rough, wild, but alive. Emily bolted upright and ran into the room. She found her daughter collapsed on the floor, clutching a soaked piece of paper streaked with watercolor. "Lila, you just made a sound!" But Lila didn't hear her. She only stared at the window, her lips trembling, still mouthing in silence. Jayden. Cut to morning. Richard was on the phone, his voice tight. "I want Attorney Mark Jensen here immediately. We're helping that boy." Emily sat by Lila's bed, gently drying her hair. The girl was silent, her eyes swollen, her iPad resting on her lap. Suddenly, Lila turned it on, typed quickly, and pushed the screen toward her parents. 2 words. "Save him." Then another line. "He saved me first." Richard froze. He looked at his wife, and their eyes both filled with tears. "We will," he whispered. "I promise." Sometimes, what awakens a soul isn't a miracle, but the fear of losing the only person who ever made you feel alive. That night, the Whitmore mansion was no longer quiet, no longer filled with the cold silence it once held, but with a different kind of stillness, one that trembled softly, like a heart learning to beat again after a 7-year sleep. That morning, courtroom number 4 was packed. Reporters, cameras, flashlights flaring nonstop. They had come to witness the trial of a homeless boy named Jayden Carter, who had gotten into a fight defending his little sister from a group of thugs at the shelter. But no one knew that the person who would change everything that day would be an 8-year-old girl, Lila Whitmore. Jayden sat at the defendant's table. His face was calm, but his eyes were heavy with sorrow. Beside him, his sister Aaliyah clutched his hand tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. In the back row, Lila sat between her parents, Richard and Emily Whitmore. She gripped a small folded paper in her sweaty palm. She had never stood in front of a crowd like this for 7 years. But today, she wasn't afraid. Judge Reynolds tapped his gavel lightly. "Court is now in session. Case of Jayden Carter charged with assault." The prosecutor rose, voice sharp as glass. "Your Honor, the defendant recently turned 18, seriously injured 3 other minors. Even if his motive was to protect his sister, the act remains a crime." Each word landed like a blade twisting in the heart. Jayden lowered his head, offering no defense. He knew, in the eyes of the world, a homeless kid had no chance of being understood. In the back, Lila watched him, lips pressed tight. She remembered that night. The rain, the sirens, the gentle smile on Jayden's face as the cuffs closed. He had said, "It's okay, little one." But to her, nothing had ever been okay. And then, Lila stood up. Every eye in the courtroom turned toward the tiny girl in the white dress. The judge frowned. "Young lady, who are you?" A voice rose, trembling, hoarse, but so clear it sent chills through the room. "I'm Lila Whitmore." A ripple spread across the gallery. Lila Whitmore, the daughter of a tech billionaire, the girl who hadn't spoken a single word for 7 years, was now speaking. She strolled toward the center of the wooden floor. With every step, the courtroom grew quieter. She stopped, looked straight at the judge. "Jayden saved me," she said haltingly. "Not from danger, but from silence." Her voice was fragile, yet each word cut straight into every heart. Richard froze. Emily burst into tears, her trembling hands clutching each other. Lila pulled out her small iPad from her bag, turned on the screen, and held it up. On it was a message she had typed the night before. "Jayden didn't fight to hurt anyone. He only protected his sister, the same way he protected me. He never forced me to speak. He just made me feel safe, enough to try." Judge Reynolds read the words aloud, his voice faltering at the final line. Then he looked down at the girl, eyes glistening with emotion he tried to hide. Lila lifted her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. She took a deep breath and whispered, "He saw me, not as a broken child, but just as me." The courtroom fell utterly silent. No rustling papers, no hurried breaths, only morning light streaming through the tall windows falling on the trembling face of the little girl. And something sacred is taking place. Judge Reynolds nodded softly. He set the gavel down, speaking slowly, each word landing deep in every heart. Case dismissed. Jayden Carter, you are free to go. The room erupted. Aaliyah threw her arms around her brother. Jayden couldn't believe what he'd heard. He turned and saw Lila standing there, tears glistening but a smile lighting her face. He stepped forward and bent down. She walked up, opened her arms, and hugged him, whispering, "Family." Jayden's voice trembled as he answered, "Always." In the room where people spoke of guilt, a little girl found her voice again, not to defend herself, but to protect the one who taught her that love doesn't need words. It had been 3 days since the trial ended. The name Jayden Carter appeared everywhere in the headlines. Homeless boy freed, thanks to the first words of a billionaire's daughter. But to the Whitmore family, what mattered more than any headline was this: Lila had begun to speak. Not much, not fluently, but every word she said was like a note of music. Simple, awkward, yet beautiful. That afternoon, Jayden returned to the mansion. This time, not sneaking through the garden, not standing beside the trash bins, but walking straight through the front gate. Richard opened the door. He didn't speak, only nodded. That nod was a greeting, a sign of respect, and a silent thank you. Emily stepped forward, holding a simple document in her hand. "Richard wants to offer you a job here, officially. Not charity, real work. As Lila's companion." Jayden stood quietly, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "I don't want to take pity money." "It's not pity," Richard said, voice low and steady. "It's trust." Inside the house, Lila was already waiting. The moment she saw Jayden, she ran up and hugged him, whispering, her voice trembling but sweet, "Hi, Jayden." Jayden smiled, eyes glistening. "Hi, little one." She took his hand and pulled him toward the living room, where a grand piano still sat under a white cover. That piano had been silent for 7 years. "You want to play?" Jayden asked. Lila nodded. She lifted the cover, wiped away the dust with her small hand, then pointed to the seat beside her. "Sit here." Jayden sat down. Lila placed his fingers on the keys and pressed a few notes. "This one is La. This one is Re." The sound rose, shaky, imperfect, but full of life. Then she began to teach him a simple melody, the first tune she had ever composed herself. "You taught me bottles," she said with a tiny smile. "I'll teach you piano." Jayden laughed, for the first time in many heavy days. "Deal." From the doorway, Emily watched them. 2 children were once broken in different ways. One who had feared the world and one the world had rejected, now creating music together. She turned to her husband, tears falling silently as she wrapped her arms around him. That evening, all 4 of them had dinner together: Richard, Emily, Lila, and Jayden. For the first time, there was no quiet meal, no rules, no barriers. Lila spoke in broken sentences. Jayden cracked clumsy jokes. And when Emily burst out laughing, Richard realized their home finally had the sound of life. Jayden's little sister Kesha came to live with them a week later. 2 girls from 2 different worlds became friends almost instantly. Lila taught Kesha to read. Kesha taught Lila to dance. The whole mansion filled with laughter, music, and the playful rhythm of bottle songs the 2 girls invented together. One late evening, Richard said quietly to Emily, "I used to think we were saving Jayden, but maybe he's the one who saved us. A house once trapped in silence," he added, "is now alive with sound. Not the sound of expensive instruments, but laughter, voices, tiny thank yous, the kind of sounds money can never buy. 10 years have passed since that fateful morning in the courtroom. The story of the billionaire's daughter who spoke her first words to save a homeless boy who became a legend that inspired hearts across America. And if someone were to ask, whatever happened to Lila Whitmore? The answer would be, she became exactly the person Jayden once believed she could be. Dr. Lila Whitmore, now 18, stood on the stage at the Young Humanitarian of the Year ceremony in New York. She wore a white lab coat, her face glowing with quiet confidence. Before her, the audience filled every seat. Among them sat Jayden Carter, now 27, dressed in a simple suit, smiling silently. Lila stepped up to the microphone. Her voice was low, calm, no longer trembling like it once had. When I was 8, she began, people said I was broken, that I needed fixing, that I needed to learn to speak like everyone else. But then, I met a boy who had nothing but kindness and a genuine smile. And he taught me that I was never broken at all. She paused, eyes drifting to the second row, where Jayden sat, his warm gaze glistening with tears. Jayden Carter never tried to make me speak. He simply made me believe that even my silence had value. And once I was heard, I found my voice. The hall fell utterly silent. No sound, only the rhythm of hearts and soft breaths. Today, Lila continued, I don't stand here to receive this award, but to give it back to the one who saw me when the world turned away. She lifted her chin, pride shining through every word. Jayden Carter, the one who taught me that true love doesn't need words. Applause erupted like a rising tide, echoing through the grand hall. Jayden stood, bowed slightly, his eyes wet with emotion. The look they shared held 10 years of gratitude, love, and everything that words could never express. After the ceremony, they stepped outside together. The New York afternoon had turned golden, sunlight melting over glass towers like honey. They stood side by side on the marble steps, the same kind of steps where their story had once begun. Except now, behind them, stood the building bearing their shared name. The Whitmore Carter Foundation is an organization they co-founded to help children living with special silence. On the plaque at the entrance it read, helping the world listen, one child at a time. Jayden turned to her, his voice soft and deep. Remember? The first time we met, you didn't say a word. Just tried to blow a bottle and no sound came out. Lila smiled. But you told me. The first sound always takes time. They both laughed. Autumn winds swept past, scattering golden leaves down the steps. The two sat quietly watching the sun set over the city. Jayden said, I remember thinking back then, I was just collecting trash. Lila replied, and I remember thinking, you had just collected my soul. They fell silent again. But this silence was different. It was warm, light, full of gratitude. 10 years ago, a little girl chose silence. A boy chose to listen, and together, they created a miracle. Because sometimes, what the world needs most isn't more voices, but more hearts are willing to listen. Some voices may never echo in sound, yet they are still heard through love. True love doesn't try to teach us to speak. It simply stays until we're ready to be heard. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be listened to today. This is Deep Life Tales, where every silence hides a story worth understanding. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to help us spread stories of kindness and the power of love.